Reddit, who deserves the dang, they really were right award? Dmitry Mendeleev, who wrote the periodic table, at the time, there were dozens of gaps in it, and he said those were 4 elements that hadn't yet been discovered. He was ridiculed for positing that there still were undiscovered elements, but within 10-20 years, other scientists began discovering some of those missing elements, validating Mendeleev. Fortunately, he was still alive then and lived to see his theory proved. Really gives me immense satisfaction when people are alive to see that happen. Harry Markopoulou, who figured out the Madoff Ponzi scheme and delivered it fully documented to the SEC. This was years before the scheme fell apart in 2008. There's a book called No One Would Listen, also made into a movie. I learned about this in a personal finance class this past year, and watched a documentary on it. Simply amazing how many times he reached out, with all the evidence, and was just brushed aside. Gastric ulcers were thought to be caused by stress and spicy food. Dr. Barry Marshall thought it might be caused by a germ. He intentionally infected himself with the bacteria. He got sick from it, and he cured himself with antibiotics. It earned him a Nobel Prize. Alfred Wegener. He was a German astronomer, meteorologist, climatologist and geophysicist who was alive in the early 20th century. He saw how the continents fit together, believed that the continents were slowly moving over geological time, and coined the terms continental drift and Ponzi. He traveled all over the world collecting evidence of this. He found ancient coral reef remains at higher latitudes. He found perfectly matching fossil records at continental margins, and perfectly matching rock layers. He found perfectly matching glacial evidence at continental boundaries too. Of course, all of his contemporaries laughed at him and completely disregarded his evidence. The key he was missing to his theory was seafloor spreading, which no one knew about because sonar had not been invented yet. Unfortunately, he died before seafloor spreading was discovered, but dang was he right. Greg LeMond, the Tour de France winner who accused Lance Armstrong of doping way before anyone believed it. Nikita Khrushchev, on the US going into Vietnam. Why take the risk? It will drop into our lap like a rotten apple. Ralph Nader advocating for cockpit security, including locks, decades before 9/11. Sam Houston, who basically predicted the outcome of the American Civil War when he refused to swear loyalty to the Confederacy, said this: "Let me tell you what is coming. After the sacrifice of countless millions of treasure and hundreds of thousands of lives, you may win Southern independence if God be not against you, but I doubt it. I tell you that, while I believe with you in the doctrine of states' rights, the North is determined to preserve this union. They are not a fiery, impulsive people as you are, for they live in colder climates. But when they begin to move in a given direction, they move with the steady momentum and perseverance of a mighty avalanche. And what I fear is, they will overwhelm the South." And he sure was dang right about that. I don't want to play 10 years in the NBA and then die of a heart attack at 40. Pistol Pete Maravich was 25 years old when he gave Pennsylvania reporter Andy Newser that quote. He died at 40 while playing 3-on-3 basketball in Pasadena on the 5th of January, 1988. He played 10 years in the NBA. This is like Bear Bryant saying if he ever stopped coaching football, I'll croak in a week. He actually died 4 weeks after retirement. The guy who warned that the O-rings would fail. Alan McDonald, Roger Boyce Julie, Bob Eberling, at least one more. As if that story couldn't get worse, McDonald for one said he actually thought the rockets would explode on the pad, so when the shuttle cleared the tower, he had to have felt some brief relief. William Seward, bought Alaska for some trivial amount and was mocked most of his life. Seward's folly, Seward's icebox. Then we found tons of gold and oil and made back much more money off resources alone. Also they have moose and lights and mountains and crap, so. The dingo ate my baby woman. Truly a sad story. Richard Stallman. 5 years ago we would have never thought computer manufacturers would put bloatware in their BIOS. Jose Canseco. Guy wrote a book detailing MLB's steroid use. Everyone went nuts and blamed him for trying to make a quick buck. 10 years later, almost the entire era juiced. Jose was right. The worst part is that he's still a massive butthole. The dude at work that I had to stand next to all night in the 1990s while he said things like, you know, the Gulf of Tonkin thing didn't really happen, right? You know, the CIA killed the democratically elected president of Iran, right? You know, Kissinger is wanted for war crimes, right? Yeah dude, you were right, I was wrong. Here's your moment. This is a more personal example, but still relevant, I believe. My little sister would definitely get this award, as she saw red flags with Amway before me or our parents. Our dad was introduced to the MLM and subsidiary Quickster, now called Amway Global, by a co-worker, and thought it would be a good way to make money on the side. We attended several seminars, meetings, and an event known as Free Enterprise Day, and met other business owners. Good grief, it was a genuine cult on par with Scientology, complete with brainwashing, chants such as freedom, awesome, and flush that job, and bait and switch tactics. However, only my sister recognized something vile about it from the beginning, when she repeatedly said how creepy the people and events were. She also cleverly asked dad to help her with math homework by using an Amway venture as an example of how much money one can make. Depressingly, the answer was a very low amount. Eventually, as we got exposed to more of the cultishness of Amway, and heard of more horror stories, we realized just how right my sister was. She has always been very vigilant since she was born, but even for a, then, 9-year-old, it was nothing short of amazing. We quit the venture, and ended up saving tons of money from being lost in a financial void. Seattle's former mayor Mike McGinn ran on a platform that included the idea that a huge tunneling project was poorly thought out and that Seattle would be on the hook for when the project went over budget. Now the tunnel boring machine, Bertha, has been stuck under downtown for months. The project is way over budget and has run long. The whole thing is a giant mess and he was absolutely right. Edmund Halley, in 1705, applying historical astronomy methods, he published Synopsis Astronomiae Cometici, which stated his belief that the comet sightings of 1456, 1531, 1607, and 1682 related to the same comet, which he predicted would return in 1758. Halley did not live to witness the comet's return, but when it did, the comet became generally known as Halley's Comet. Wikipedia. George Washington, however, political parties may now and then answer popular ends. They are likely in the course of time and things to become potent engines by which cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men will be enabled to subvert the power of the people and to usurp for themselves the reins of government, destroying afterwards the very engines which have lifted them to unjust dominion. From his farewell address in 1796, he basically advised the country against political parties and how it would tear the country apart. 2016 elections couldn't be a better time to bring this quote out. The user who guessed the ending to him and got downvoted to heck. I need a link. The guy who predicted that the Japanese would attack Pearl Harbor but no one listened to him, including the general who he had told. His job was to translate encrypted messages coming from Japan's naval force but he was unable to do so in time. Despite this, he told the general that the Japanese would attack Pearl Harbor because that's what he would do. This is what red teams are for now. Ignaz Semmelweis was a Hungarian doctor who suggested doctors needed to wash their hands more often. He noticed that women were getting puerperal fever at an alarming rate at Vienna General Hospital because doctors were going from handling cadavers directly to delivering babies without washing their hands. He suggested that doctors wash their hands in a solution of chlorinated lime. Naturally, he was scoffed at. Nobody took him seriously. He suffered a mental breakdown and wound up being committed to an asylum at age 47, where he died after being badly beaten by the guards. His findings were later confirmed by Louis Pasteur's confirmation of germ theory and Joseph Lister's pioneering work in using antiseptics in surgery. Semmelweis didn't understand why the cadaver handling led to women dying in childbirth, but he was right that the doctors needed to up their hygiene game. He didn't understand why, but he definitely saw the correlation. His life story is super sad. The CIA that warned about invading Iraq, that toppling Saddam could lead to a dangerous period of internal violence and provide a boost to terrorists, but those warnings were seemingly ignored. Stanislav Petrov, aka the man who saved the world, aka the man who did not press the button. During the Cold War in 1983, it was his job to press the button, or at least alert the higher-ups who would have done so, to release Russian missiles that would have ended the United States. He was supposed to do this if the computer showed US missiles coming toward Russia, and when the computers showed him just that, he decided it was an error. He was right, but he was also dismissed from his duties. I just watched The Big Short last night, so the handful of guys who predicted the financial crisis of 07/08 a few years before it actually happened. Imagine carrying the knowledge that millions of people are about to lose their homes and there's nothing you can do about it. There's a great scene where two of the younger guys figure out a way to make a huge amount of money from the knowledge and start dancing around in joy, only to have Brad Pitt's character yell at them to stop celebrating, since they're going to be profiting from people basically being thrown out on the street. Pretty sobering information. I just recently saw this movie. It surprisingly, to me at least, explains the hosting market crash in a way that is relatable and simple enough for people to understand, which makes the entire situation all the more tragic. Sinéad O'Connor. She was demonized in the 90s for calling out the child abuse in the Catholic Church. Turns out she was really right about it. Her SNL performance where she tore up a pic of the Pope probably killed her career in the US. People didn't get it. Most thought she was just trying to be offensive. It was a few years until the story of abuse landed in the US. In his final address to the nation, Dwight D. Eisenhower warned the United States about the military-industrial complex that he had seen coming from a mile away. On a similar note, get it all on record now. Get the films. Get the witnesses. Because somewhere down the track of history some bastard will get up and say that this never happened. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, on future Holocaust denial. My parents told me to treat school like a job. I didn't, and now I realize I could have gone to college for about $50,000 less if I'd actually tried in high school. Look at it that way and it's like you're making $15,000 a year for school. Alexis Freaking de Tocqueville, author of Democracy in America. He wrote the first volume of his incredibly insightful study of American democracy when he was 30, in 1835. In it, he predicted that Russia and the US would rise to be competing superpowers. He made this prediction way before anyone else saw it coming, and it didn't come true for around 100 years. Mad props. Dude was also crazy smart and a talented writer. Lucretius get my vote. He was an ancient Roman whose poem on the nature of things predicted atoms' chemical reactions, law of conservation of mass, on a gigantic scale, evolution. He was wrong about a lot of other stuff but got the vast majority of atomic theory totally right. I think the hands down winner for this award goes to Sinéad O'Connor, who organized the construction of a 530-kilometer long water pipe to a rural town in Australia in the 1890s. The pipeline was heavily criticized for not being expected to work and wasting millions. In those days was a lot. Upon completion and the commencement of the pipeline, no water happened to flow and O'Connor ended up committing suicide over the community uproar. It turned out the project was a success, but it just took a few days for the water to actually reach the destination. The waterline was such a huge factor as Australia's development, and it's such a huge shame the genius who made it died thinking he was a failure. Marshal Ferdinand Foch, the commander of the French army during the First World War, was present at the signing of the Treaty of Versailles on the 28th of June 1919. As it was being signed, he declared, "This is not a peace. It is an armistice for 20 years." 20 years and 64 days later, Germany invaded Poland and the Second World War began. Winston Churchill knew very early on that Britain was probably going to have to go to war with the Nazis, and that the Munich Agreement was a ploy. Luckily, he was able to convince many higher-ups that he was right. While Chamberlain was celebrating peace in our time, Britain's factories were already tooling up for total war. When the Munich Agreement was signed, Britain was making about 250 warplanes a month. When Germany invaded France less than 2 years later, the number was over 1,500. The scale of this war will always astound and baffle me. The rapper Biggie Smalls said in an interview that he thought someone was trying to kill him. He was shot to death not long after. Heck, not just that. Biggie died between the release of his first and second albums, the first titled Ready to Die and the second titled Life After Death. His second album starts with Biggie dying in the hospital, but Biggie was shot only a month before the album came out, and everything including the title was already finalized. You have been visited by the blanket pig. Upvote for good night's sleep for the next lunar year. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day you magnificent people.